The Grand Ascension Ceremony was the kind of event where people wore their finest clothes and their most diplomatic faces, while secretly hoping something interesting would happen to break up the monotony. Declan Hayes stood in the back section of the Hall of Ascendants, wearing a formal uniform that itched in places he couldn't scratch without looking unprofessional, and tried to appear engaged with cultural proceedings he barely understood. The hall itself was magnificent in that overwhelming way ancient alien architecture tended to be, carved from crystalline stone that caught light and amplified it into prismatic displays across soaring walls. The ceiling arched high enough that clouds could probably form up there, and the acoustics turned every sound into something reverberating and significant. At the center stood the ceremonial focal point, a massive stone altar, and embedded in that stone, the blade of dominion. Declan had read the briefing materials. The sword was supposedly 3,000 years old, forged in some mythical age when Velsharan culture was more mysticism than technology. According to legend, whoever drew the blade would be destined to serve as the ruler's consort and protector, bound by ancient law and prophetic certainty. It hadn't been drawn in 3 centuries, and most modern Velsharan treated it as ceremonial relic rather than functional prophecy. A nice story, good symbolism, probably couldn't actually be moved. Queen Isildra approached the altar with the kind of regal bearing that came from genetic engineering or intense training or both. She was tall, most Velsharan were, standing around 6.5 feet, with those distinctive long ears that swept back from her skull in elegant curves. She wore ceremonial robes that probably cost more than Declan's annual salary, and her expression was carefully neutral in that way royalty mastered to avoid giving anything away. She placed her hand on the sword's hilt. The hall held its collective breath. She pulled. Nothing happened. Isildra released the blade with practiced grace and turned to address the assembled court. Her voice carried perfectly in the crystalline acoustics. The blade of dominion remains dormant, as it has for generations. We proceed with the coronation under modern law, acknowledging our history while embracing our present. The age of prophecy has passed. We lead through wisdom and strength, not mystical validation. The court approved this with formal gestures. Declan's colleague, a junior analyst named Marcus who'd been assigned to the same diplomatic delegation, leaned over and whispered, "So much for ancient prophecy. Guess even magic swords eventually break. Probably just needs a software update nobody documented," Declan whispered back. "Happens all the time with legacy systems. You should go try pulling it. I'll give you 5 credits if you make it budge. You'll give me 5 credits to embarrass myself in front of alien royalty and approximately 3,000 witnesses. 5 credits and my dessert ration for a week." Declan looked at the sword, impressive, dramatic, and almost certainly welded into that stone with medieval alien metallurgy nobody understood anymore. Looked at Queen Isildra, who was beginning the formal coronation oaths with all the enthusiasm of someone reading terms and conditions. Looked at Marcus, who was grinning like he just proposed the funniest joke in diplomatic history. The ceremonial wine they'd been served before the ceremony was very good and possibly stronger than advised. "You know what?" Declan said. "Why not? It's symbolic anyway." He stepped out of the back section, moving through the crowd of Velsharan nobles who turned to stare at the human walking, toward their sacred altar with the confidence of someone who'd miscalculated badly. Diplomatic security looked alarmed. Ambassador Chen, the head of the human delegation, looked like she was calculating how quickly she could disavow knowledge of his existence. Queen Isildra paused mid-oath, her amber eyes fixing on Declan with an expression of confused irritation. "Yes, may I help you?" "Sorry to interrupt, Your Majesty," Declan said, keeping his voice polite and casual. "I'm just curious about the mechanism. I'm Declan Hayes, junior diplomatic aide, and I'm kind of fascinated by ancient technology. Mind if I take a look at the sword? I promise not to break anything." The hall went completely silent. Then someone laughed, a Velsharan noble, sharp and mocking. Others joined in, rippling through the crowd like an uncomfortable wave. Queen Isildra's expression shifted from irritation to something colder, more contemptuous. You wish to examine the blade of dominion, a human, a diplomatic aid. Her voice carried perfectly, amplified by the hall's acoustics into something that felt like divine judgment. By all means, the court could use entertainment. Guards, allow the human to approach. The laughter intensified. Declan, committed now and definitely regretting decisions made under the influence of ceremonial wine, walked to the altar. Up close, the blade was even more impressive. The metal seemed to shift in the light, inscribed with characters he couldn't read, the hilt wrapped in material that looked organic. It radiated presence, the kind of weight that suggested it was important whether or not it functioned. He wrapped his hands around the hilt. It was warm, warmer than it should be, like something alive. "Go ahead," Queen Isildra said, her voice dripping with amused contempt. "Pull. Show us what human determination can accomplish against 3,000 years of Velsharan tradition." Declan pulled. The sword slid free like it had never been stuck at all. Light exploded. Not metaphorical, not subtle, actual brilliant white-gold fire that erupted from the blade and flooded the Hall of Ascendance with radiance so intense that every person shielded their eyes. The crystalline walls amplified the glow until the entire chamber looked like the inside of a star. And Declan felt the sword vibrate in his hands like he'd grabbed a live electrical current. Ancient runes carved into the blade ignited, blazing with script he couldn't read, but everyone else clearly could based on the gasps and shouts echoing through the hall. The light washed over everything, and Declan felt something shift inside his head, not painful but present, like a door opening in his mind he hadn't known existed. The glow faded slowly, reluctantly, leaving afterimages burned into his vision. The Hall of Ascendance was completely silent except for the humming sword in Declan's hands, which vibrated with energy that traveled up his arms and made his entire nervous system feel electric and alive. Queen Isildra stood frozen, one hand pressed to her chest, her amber eyes wide with absolute shock. Her expression had transformed from mocking contempt to horror, and awe, and something else Declan couldn't identify. She staggered backward, and courtiers rushed to support her. An elderly Velsharan in priest's robes approached Declan carefully, moving like someone approaching a dangerous animal. He spoke in rapid Velsharan, and Declan's translator implant struggled to keep up with the formal archaic phrasing. "The blade of dominion has chosen. After 3 centuries of silence, the prophecy awakens. By ancient law and sacred tradition, the one who draws the blade is destined," the translation faltered, "bound as consort and protector to the rightful ruler. The bond cannot be refused. The choice is made." The hall erupted into chaos. Nobles shouting in Velsharan, some in anger, some in disbelief, some demanding the human be removed immediately. Declan stood there holding a glowing sword that was apparently way more functional than anyone expected, trying to process what exactly he'd just accidentally done. Queen Isildra raised one hand. Silence fell like someone had hit a mute button. She approached Declan slowly, her eyes never leaving the sword in his hands. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled standard, each word precisely enunciated. "Do you know what you have done, human?" "I pulled a sword," Declan offered, which in retrospect was probably not the diplomatic answer but was definitely the honest one. "You fulfilled prophecy. You drew the blade of dominion that has rejected every warrior, noble, and champion who attempted it for 300 years. By the laws of my people, laws older than my empire, you are now my destined consort, my blade-sworn protector, my partner by right of prophecy and tradition." Her voice was shaking slightly. "Refusing this bond means I lose my claim to the throne. Accepting it means you bind yourself to me and my empire for life. Do you understand?" Declan looked at the sword, which was still glowing faintly and humming in his grip like something alive and very pleased with itself. Looked at the Queen, whose life he just accidentally claimed through a combination of curiosity and decent wine. Looked at the hundreds of Velsharan nobles who appeared to be calculating whether assassination was politically viable. "I think," he said carefully, "I just made a really significant cultural mistake." "That," Queen Isildur said, her voice somewhere between fury and hysterical laughter, "is the understatement of the century." The ceremony dissolved into political chaos, and Declan Hayes realized his career as a junior diplomatic aide was officially over. What it had been replaced with, he had absolutely no idea. But the sword in his hands hummed warmly, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he felt something click into place that suggested maybe, just maybe, this wasn't entirely accidental after all. Declan was escorted from the Hall of Ascendance by a combination of confused human security, hostile Velsharan guards, and what appeared to be priests who kept making gestures he couldn't interpret. The sword stayed in his hands because, apparently releasing, it was now culturally inappropriate or magically impossible. Nobody seemed willing to clarify which. They took him to quarters that were technically guest accommodations, but felt more like protective custody. The rooms were elegant, spacious, and surrounded by guards who looked at him with expressions ranging from confusion to barely suppressed hostility. The sword finally stopped glowing when he set it on a table, but it continued humming faintly, like a contented cat purring in his presence. Ambassador Chen arrived 40 minutes later, accompanied by legal advisors, cultural experts, and enough documentation to reconstruct human Velsharan relations from scratch. She sat down across from Declan with the kind of calm that preceded volcanic eruptions. "Explain," she said, "in simple terms that won't make my migraine worse, what possessed you to touch that sword." I was curious about the mechanism, also possibly slightly drunk on ceremonial wine. Declan gestured helplessly. It was supposed to be symbolic. Nobody said it actually worked. It hasn't worked in 3 centuries. Thousands have tried. Warriors, nobles, champions. All failed. The blade remaining dormant became a cultural symbol that Velsharan society had moved past prophecy into pragmatic governance. Chen pulled up screens showing historical documentation. "You just shattered 300 years of comfortable modernization by proving ancient prophecy still functions. To be fair, I didn't know that would happen." That's not a defense that holds up in interstellar diplomacy. Chen switched screens to show current Velsharan political analysis. "Do you understand what drawing that blade means?" The priest said something about consort and destiny. "By Velsharan law, ancient, sacred, absolutely binding law, whoever draws the blade of dominion is the ruler's destined consort and protector. It's not marriage exactly, but it's similar. You're bound to Queen Isildur by prophecy. Your lives are linked, your fates are intertwined, and refusing the bond destroys her legitimacy as ruler." Declan felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What happens if I refuse?" Chen was quiet for a moment. "By Velsharan tradition, if the blade's chosen consort rejects the bond, the ruler who failed to maintain that bond loses their claim to the throne. Isildur would be forced to abdicate. Succession would fall to the next in line. Noble houses that are significantly less interested in maintaining peaceful relations with humanity. So if I walk away, she loses everything." "Yes, and we lose a political ally who's been instrumental in maintaining stability in 3 sectors." Chen leaned forward. "But if you accept, you bind yourself to someone you don't know, to a culture you barely understand, and to responsibilities you never agreed to accept. Human Command doesn't want you entangled in Velsharan succession politics. We want you to refuse, publicly, and return to human space before this escalates. And doom the Queen. She's not your responsibility, Declan. You're a junior diplomatic aide. You're not supposed to be making decisions that affect interstellar relations." Chen pulled up more documentation. You have 24 hours before the formal bonding ceremony must occur or be permanently declined. I need you to prepare a statement refusing the bond. We'll handle the political fallout. Before Declan could respond, a Velsharan scholar slipped into the room, a younger noble, moving quickly and quietly. She spoke rapidly in Standard, her accent thick but understandable. Ambassador Chen, I apologize for interrupting, but Mr. Hayes deserves to know the full context. Who are you? Scholar Minsara, Queen Isildra's cultural advisor. I have information relevant to his decision. She looked at Declan. The Queen's claim to the throne has been contested for months. Traditionalist factions oppose her progressive policies, her willingness to work with other species. They've been waiting for an excuse to force her out. The blade remaining dormant gave them ammunition, proof she wasn't truly chosen, wasn't legitimate. And now the blade has chosen someone, Declan said quietly. It has chosen you, a human, which either validates her approach of cross-species cooperation or provides her enemies with evidence that she's so illegitimate even the blade had to look outside Velsharan society to find someone compatible. Minsara pulled out a tablet showing political analysis. If you accept the bond, you give her the one thing that could silence her rivals, validation by prophecy itself. If you refuse, her enemies win, and the empire likely descends into succession war. Ambassador Chen looked like she wanted to argue but couldn't find solid ground. This isn't Declan's responsibility. He didn't volunteer for this. Neither did the Queen, Minsara countered. She inherited a fracturing empire, a contested throne, and expectations she never asked for. Mr. Hayes accidentally gave her a chance to stabilize everything. The question is whether he's willing to help, or whether he values his comfort over her survival. That's not fair, Declan said. No, Minsara agreed. It's not, but prophecy rarely is. She left as quickly as she'd arrived, leaving Declan and Ambassador Chen in uncomfortable silence. The sword on the table hummed quietly, like it had opinions about the conversation but was too polite to interrupt. Chen stood. You have 24 hours. Think about what you want your life to look like, because accepting that bond changes everything permanently. I'll prepare the refusal statement just in case. She left with her advisors, and Declan was alone with the sword, and a decision he absolutely wasn't qualified to make. He picked up the blade, still warm, still humming, and felt that strange connection again, like the sword was aware of him in ways that should be impossible for metal and crystal. He thought about going back to safe diplomatic work. Thought about Queen Isildra losing her throne because some junior aide got curious at the wrong moment. Thought about succession wars and political fallout and all the people who'd suffer if stability collapsed. The sword pulsed warmly in his hands, and Declan wondered if ancient prophecy had accidentally chosen the worst possible person or exactly the right one. He had 24 hours to figure out which. Declan demanded a meeting with Queen Isildra. Ambassador Chen tried to deny the request, citing diplomatic protocol and approximately 17 different regulations. Declan pointed out that he was apparently the Queen's prophesied consort and maybe protocol had already been thoroughly violated. Chen made several calls, issued several threats, and grudgingly arranged the meeting. They met in a private chamber, no guards inside, though plenty outside. The blade of dominion rested on a table between them, still humming faintly. Queen Isildra looked different here, stripped of ceremonial robes and royal presentation. She wore simpler clothing, her long ears bare of jewelry, and she looked exhausted. She spoke first in Standard, her voice cold and controlled. You may refuse the bond. I will not fight it. I have spent months attempting to hold my throne through politics and compromise, and if the blade's choice is insufficient, then perhaps I was not meant to rule after all. That's not what I came here to discuss, Declan said. Then what? Her amber eyes fixed on him with intensity that made him understand why she commanded an empire. You wish to negotiate terms, demand concessions. I assure you, becoming consort to a contested queen with enemies in every noble house is not the political advantage you might imagine. I want to know why. Declan. Isildur was quiet for a long moment. I do not know. The blade chooses based on compatibility, not just genetic or physical, but psychological, philosophical, something deeper than conscious assessment. It identifies someone who complements the ruler's weaknesses, who can provide what they lack. 300 years of warriors couldn't do that. 300 years of warriors were too similar to the rulers. They attempted to serve. Strength seeking strength, honor seeking honor. The blade was not looking for replication, it was seeking complement. She pulled up a screen showing Declan's diplomatic records. After you drew the sword, I had my advisors compile everything available about you. You are a cultural mediator. Your specialty is building bridges between incompatible systems. You identify patterns others miss, find compromises in impossible situations, and have a documented talent for making people from completely different backgrounds work together. That's my job description, not a qualification for prophecy. The blade did not choose a warrior, Isildur continued, her voice softening slightly. It chose a translator, someone who could help me navigate the impossible task of modernizing an ancient empire without destroying what makes it valuable. My people are divided, traditionalists who cling to old ways, progressives who want to abandon them entirely. I have been trying to find balance to honor our history while building our future. It is exhausting, lonely, impossible. And you think I can help with that? I think the blade believes you can. And the blade has not been wrong in 3,000 years of recorded history. She looked at him directly. But I also understand that you did not volunteer for this. You pulled a sword out of curiosity and alcohol, not commitment. If you refuse the bond, I will accept that consequence and find another way to maintain my throne. I will not bind you to my fate against your will. Declan studied her, this queen who fought impossible battles, who looked exhausted beneath royal composure, who was offering him an exit despite what it would cost her. What happens to you if I refuse, really? I lose legitimacy. My rivals move to claim the throne. Best case scenario, I am exiled with honor. Worst case, I am executed for failing to fulfill prophecy. She said it calmly, like discussing whether rather than her own death. My supporters, the scholars, the progressives, the nobles who believe in cross-species cooperation, will be purged. The empire will likely descend into succession conflict. Your people will lose a political ally and gain hostile neighbors. That's a lot of pressure to put on one accidental sword pulling. Yes, it is unfair, unconscionable, and entirely not your responsibility. Isildur stood, moved to the window overlooking the crystal city beyond. Which is why I will not ask you to accept. Make your choice based on what you want your life to be, not on guilt or obligation. The blade chose you, but you must choose for yourself. Before Declan could respond, alarms erupted. Sharp, urgent, the kind of sound that meant violence was imminent. Isildur's expression transformed instantly from exhausted queen to combat-ready warrior. What's happening? My rivals are not waiting for your decision. She moved to hidden panels in the wall, pulling out weapons with practiced efficiency. They are forcing the issue through assassination. If we both die, the prophecy dies with us and succession falls to them. The door exploded inward, not knocked down, but dissolved by some kind of chemical charge that ate through metal like acid. Armed Velsharan poured through, wearing unmarked armor, carrying weapons that hummed with lethal intent. Isildur grabbed the blade of dominion from the table and threw it to Declan. If you want to live, fight. If you want me to live, choose. Right now. Declan caught the sword, warm, humming, alive in his hands, and felt that connection snap into sharp focus. Not just metal and crystal, but linked to something larger. He could feel Isildur through it, sense her determination and fear and desperate hope. The assassins advanced. Isildur moved to intercept, blades appearing in her hands with lethal grace. She wasn't just political royalty, she was trained warrior, moving with deadly precision, cutting down the first attacker before they could fire. "Defend yourself," she shouted at Declan while engaging two more assassins simultaneously. Declan had no combat training. He'd filed diplomatic reports and mediated cultural disputes, and once broke up a fight between two junior staffers arguing about lunch. He absolutely was not qualified to fight armed assassins. The sword in his hands disagreed. It moved almost on its own, not controlling him, but guiding, compensating for his lack of training by providing instinctive knowledge of combat forms he'd never learned. An assassin lunged at him and the blade responded, parrying with precision Declan didn't possess, creating opening for counterattack his body executed before his brain caught up. He wasn't skilled, but he was functional, effective enough to not die immediately. They fought back-to-back, queen and accidental consort, defending against assassins who represented everything wrong with Velsharan traditionalist politics. It was desperate, chaotic, and absolutely not what Declan had imagined when he accepted this diplomatic posting. An assassin got past Isildur's guard, blade aimed at her spine. Declan moved without thinking, the blade of Dominion blazing with light as it intercepted the strike. The force of the connection threw the assassin backward, and Declan felt the sword surge with approval. Security finally arrived, both human forces and loyal Velsharan warriors, overwhelming the remaining assassins. The threat ended, leaving Declan and Isildur standing in a destroyed chamber, both bleeding from minor wounds, both breathing hard. The blade of Dominion blazed in Declan's hands, brighter than before, and he felt that connection to Isildur solidify into something unbreakable. Not magical transformation, but absolute certainty. Ambassador Chen burst through with security forces, took one look at the scene, and her expression suggested she was reconsidering every career choice that led to this moment. "The assassination attempt has been traced to 3 rival noble houses," she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "The conspiracy is exposed. Public opinion is swinging dramatically in favor of the Queen, seeing her fight beside her blade-chosen consort against those who would murder them both." She looked at Declan. "The bond is no longer optional. It's politically necessary to prevent civil war. Have you made your decision?" Declan looked at Isildur, this queen who'd fought beside him, who'd spent months holding an empire together through sheer determination, who was as terrified as he was but refused to show it. Thought about going back to safe diplomatic work, filing reports, avoiding consequences. Thought about what happened if he walked away, to her people, to the fragile progress she represented. The sword hummed warmly in his hands, and he felt Isildur's presence through it, exhausted, hopeful, trusting him with a choice that would determine everything. "I accept," Declan said, "formally, irrevocably. I'll be the Queen's consort, her blade-sworn protector, and whatever else ancient prophecy demands." Ambassador Chen looked like she'd expected this but hoped otherwise. "You understand what you're volunteering for. The scrutiny, the danger, the political complexity. I figured that out around the time armed assassins tried to kill me." Declan looked at the glowing sword. "Besides, seems like the blade has opinions, and it's been right for 3,000 years. Might as well trust it." Isildur's expression did something complicated, relief and gratitude and the beginning of genuine respect. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for choosing this, for choosing me, for being brave enough to accept consequences you never invited." "Yeah, well, someone had to pull the magic sword," Declan said. "Might as well follow through." The formal bonding ceremony was held 3 days later, giving Declan barely enough time to learn the protocols, and definitely not enough time to fully process what he was committing to. The Hall of Ascendance was filled with witnesses, Velsharan nobles, human diplomats, representatives from a dozen species, all watching as prophecy and politics collided. Declan wore formal consort robes that felt ridiculous and important in equal measure. Queen Isildra stood beside him in full ceremonial regalia, looking every inch the ruler she'd fought to become. The blade of dominion rested between them on its altar, light pulsing in steady rhythm. The priests conducted rituals that were part ancient mysticism and part cultural theater, words in Old Velsharan that Declan's translator struggled to render, gestures that meant things he didn't fully understand, oaths that bound him to her and her empire in ways that felt both symbolic and terrifyingly real. When the final words were spoken and the priests declared the bond sealed, Declan felt something shift. Not magical transformation, but psychological certainty. He was bound to her now, to this queen, to this empire, to responsibilities he'd never imagined accepting. The blade of dominion flared with brilliant light one final time, then settled into steady warm glow. The hall erupted in formal acknowledgement, some approving, some grudging, all recognizing that prophecy had spoken and politics had to adapt. Weeks passed, and Declan learned what it meant to be a prophesied consort to an alien queen. It was overwhelming. Court sessions where nobles debated in formal Velsharan he struggled to follow. Diplomatic meetings where he served as bridge between Velsharan tradition and human pragmatism. Cultural obligations he had to learn through trial and embarrassing error. Security threats that ranged from political maneuvering to actual assassination attempts. But Isildra was there, teaching him, guiding him, showing patience he hadn't expected from someone with an empire to run. She explained the factions, the personalities, the unspoken rules that governed court behavior. She trained him in basic combat, not to make him a warrior, but to give him tools to survive the dangers that came with his position. And slowly, carefully, they developed actual partnership. It wasn't romance, not yet, though there was potential underlying everything, attraction that neither acknowledged but both felt. It was something more fundamental. Two people chosen by ancient prophecy learning to trust each other, finding that maybe the sword had known what it was doing. Declan brought perspectives Isildra's upbringing never provided. He saw compromises where she saw impossible conflicts. He identified patterns in noble behavior that helped her predict political moves. He served as translator not just between languages but between worldviews, helping traditionalists and progressives find common ground. Isildra provided structure, context, and protection. She taught him Velsharan culture from the inside, shared the burdens of ruling that she'd carried alone for months, and slowly let him see the person beneath the royal mask. They developed routines, morning strategy sessions where they planned for the day's challenges, evening debriefs where they processed what went wrong and what went right, late-night conversations where exhaustion stripped away formality and they talked as equals rather than queen and consort. Declan discovered that Isildra had a sharp sense of humor hidden beneath royal composure, that she loved ancient music and hated formal banquets, that she carried guilt over every decision that hurt someone even when that decision was necessary. She was brilliant, lonely, and desperately trying to do right by people who often didn't appreciate the effort. Isildra discovered that Declan approached impossible problems with creativity that bordered on recklessness, that he made her laugh in moments when laughter felt impossible, that he saw her as a person rather than a symbol, and valued that person for who she was rather than what she represented. Somewhere in those weeks, the bond shifted from obligation to something genuine. One evening, after a particularly brutal court session where Declan had mediated a dispute between three noble houses and somehow found a compromise that satisfied everyone, they stood together in a private observation room overlooking the Crystal City. "I did not expect to like my blade-chosen consort," Isildra admitted quietly. "I was prepared to endure a political partnership out of necessity, but you have proven more valuable than prophecy suggested, not as warrior or symbol, but as actual partner who sees solutions I miss and challenges assumptions I did not know I was making." I still feel like I'm making everything up as I go, Declan said. Like any moment everyone will realize I have no idea what I'm doing, and the sword made a terrible mistake. The blade does not choose based on certainty. It chooses based on potential. Isildur looked at him, her amber eyes warm in the city's reflected light. You had potential I needed, and I am grateful ancient prophecy was wise enough to see it when neither of us could. So you're saying 3,000-year-old magic is smarter than both of us? Demonstrably, yes. She smiled, genuine, transforming her face from regal to approachable, but also that you have become more than prophecy demanded. You are not just my consort. You are my friend, my partner, someone I trust to see me fail and not judge, to watch me struggle and offer help rather than criticism. Declan felt something warm settle in his chest. Yeah, same. I came here expecting to file reports and avoid consequences. Instead, I pulled a magic sword and accidentally found someone worth all the complications that came with it. They stood together looking out over the Velshiran capital, consort and queen, human and alien, bound by prophecy that had known better than either of them what they needed. The path ahead was still complicated, still dangerous, still uncertain. Political rivals remained, cultural tensions persisted, and Declan suspected he'd spend the rest of his life navigating responsibilities he'd never trained for. But standing there beside Isildur, feeling the warmth of partnership they'd built through choice rather than obligation, he realized he didn't regret pulling that sword. The Queen had mocked him for trying. Her reaction when he succeeded had been priceless, shock and horror and awe all mixed together. But what came after, the partnership they'd forged, the trust they'd developed, the genuine connection that grew from impossible circumstances, that was valuable. And maybe, in the end, that's what the Blade of Dominion had been choosing all along. Not perfection, but potential. Not certainty, but courage to face the unknown together. Somewhere in the palace, the sword rested in its ceremonial display, no longer needed for choosing but kept as reminder of the day prophecy spoke, and two unlikely people discovered they were exactly what each other needed. Declan Hayes pulled a sword from a stone because he was curious and slightly drunk.